Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Channel. Tonight we'll be exploring the remarkable story of life on Earth. A journey spanning billions of years, filled with transformation, adaptation, and endless wonder. Before us lies a tale of tiny changes, accumulating into magnificent diversity, of creatures rising from ancient seas and spreading across continents, of life persisting through catastrophes and thriving in every corner of our planet. The story of evolution is both humbling and inspiring, something that connects every living thing that has ever existed. If you enjoy these quiet explorations, I invite you to like and subscribe or share a simple thought down in the comments. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is rest, settle in, and allow the gentle rhythm of deep time to carry you. Let's begin. The origin of life. Every living thing on Earth shares a common ancestor that lived billions of years ago. When you look around at the diversity of life, from towering redwoods to microscopic bacteria, from whales to hummingbirds, it seems impossible that they could all be related. Yet every organism on Earth, every plant, animal, fungus, and microbe traces its lineage back to a single ancestor that lived approximately 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. Scientists call this hypothetical organism Luca, the last universal common ancestor. We don't know exactly what Luca looked like, but we know it must have existed because all living things share the same basic biochemistry. We all use DNA to store genetic information. We all build proteins from the same 20 amino acids. We all use the same genetic code to translate DNA into proteins. These universal features are like a signature written into every cell, proof that all life on Earth is one great family tree, branching and diversifying across the eons, but forever connected at the root. Life began in Earth's ancient oceans. When the planet was still young, the Earth formed about 4.6 billion years ago, a molten sphere slowly cooling in the darkness of space. For hundreds of millions of years, the surface was inhospitable, bombarded by asteroids and comets. But gradually, the planet settled. Oceans formed from water vapor in the atmosphere and from icy comets that crashed into the surface. Somewhere in those ancient seas, perhaps near hydrothermal vents, where hot, mineral-rich water bubbled up from the ocean floor, or perhaps in shallow tidal pools warmed by the sun, chemistry became biology. Simple organic molecules, the building blocks of life, began to organize themselves into more complex structures. These early molecules learned to copy themselves, to build protective membranes, to harvest energy from their surroundings. The first life was nothing like the organisms we know today. It was simpler, more fragile, yet it possessed the fundamental ability to reproduce and evolve. That spark of life, once kindled, would never be extinguished. Through ice ages and volcanic eruptions, through asteroid impacts and shifting continents, life would persist and flourish. The earliest life forms were simple single-celled organisms without nuclei. For the first 2 billion years of life on Earth, all organisms were single-celled and lacked the complex internal structures we see in modern cells. These ancient microbes, called prokaryotes, were tiny bags of chemicals with a membrane to hold them together and DNA floating freely inside. They were bacteria and archaea, the two oldest branches on the tree of life. Though simple, they were remarkably successful. They learned to harvest energy from sunlight through photosynthesis. They learned to extract nutrients from rocks and gases. They formed vast communities, building layered structures called stromatolites that still exist in a few places today. These ancient organisms transformed the planet. The oxygen they produced, as a waste product of photosynthesis, gradually accumulated in the atmosphere, turning the sky from orange and hazy to the clear blue we know today. Without these humble, single-celled pioneers, complex life as we know it could never have evolved. They laid the foundation for everything that followed, and they still thrive today, outnumbering all other organisms combined. Complex cells evolved when one cell engulfed another in a symbiotic partnership. About 2 billion years ago, something extraordinary happened. A simple prokaryotic cell engulfed another, smaller cell, but instead of digesting it, the two formed a partnership. The smaller cell, probably a bacterium that was good at producing energy, survived inside its host and began providing energy in exchange for protection and nutrients. Over millions of years, this partnership became permanent. The engulfed cell evolved into the mitochondria, the tiny powerhouses that exist in almost every complex cell today. This event, called endosymbiosis, was one of the most important moments in the history of life. It gave rise to eukaryotes, cells with nuclei and complex internal structures. Later, another endosymbiosis occurred when early eukaryotes engulfed photosynthetic bacteria, which became chloroplasts in plant cells. This cooperation between once independent organisms shows that evolution is not just about competition. Partnerships and symbiosis have been just as important in shaping life. The cells in your body right now contain the descendants of those ancient bacteria, still working tirelessly to keep you alive. The Cambrian explosion multicellular life emerged gradually from colonies of single cells. For most of Earth's history, life consisted of single cells drifting alone or forming simple colonies. But around 600 million years ago, some cells began staying together after dividing, forming permanent multicellular structures. This transition happened independently several times in different lineages. At first, these multicellular organisms were simple, just clusters of cells working together. But cooperation offered advantages. Cells could specialize, some focusing on gathering food, while others handled reproduction or movement. Over time, these colonies became more integrated, more organized. Bodies began to take shape, with different tissues and organs. The first multicellular animals were soft-bodied creatures resembling jellyfish and worms. They left few fossils, but we know they existed from trace fossils, burrows, and tracks pressed into ancient sediments. These early animals set the stage for one of the most dramatic episodes in evolutionary history, a time when life exploded into countless new forms, filling the oceans with diversity. The Cambrian explosion saw an incredible burst of animal diversity over 20 million years. About 541 million years ago, the pace of evolution suddenly accelerated. In a geological blink of an eye, a span of perhaps 20 to 25 million years, most of the major animal groups we know today appeared in the fossil record. This event is called the Cambrian explosion. Suddenly, the oceans were filled with creatures possessing hard shells, complex eyes, segmented bodies, and jointed limbs. Trilobites scuttled across the seafloor. Strange predators like Anomalocaris, with grasping appendages and enormous compound eyes, hunted among the rocks. Creatures with names like Hallucigenia and Opabinia looked so alien that scientists initially struggled to understand which end was the head. This burst of innovation may have been triggered by rising oxygen levels, which provided more energy for building complex bodies. Or perhaps it was an evolutionary arms race, as predators and prey drove each other to evolve new adaptations. Whatever the cause, the Cambrian explosion transformed life on Earth, establishing the basic body plans that would persist for hundreds of millions of years. Many early animals had body plans unlike anything alive today. The Cambrian seas were populated by creatures that challenge our imagination. Hallucigenia, initially reconstructed upside down by confused paleontologists, walked on paired spines, with tentacles waving from its back. Opabinia had 5 eyes, and a long, flexible proboscis for grasping prey. Wiwaxia was covered in scales and spines, resembling a tiny armored tank. These strange animals were not evolutionary dead ends, but experiments in body design. Some lineages survived and gave rise to modern groups. Others vanished, leaving no descendants. The Cambrian seas were a testing ground where countless variations were tried, and only the successful designs persisted. It reminds us that evolution is not a straight line from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced. It is a branching tree with countless paths, most of which lead nowhere. What we see today is not the pinnacle of evolution, but merely the current survivors of an ongoing process that has no goal or direction, only endless variation and selection. The first eyes evolved during this period, transforming how animals interacted. Before the Cambrian, the world was largely dark and senseless. Organisms detected chemicals and vibrations, but vision did not exist. Then, gradually, light-sensitive cells appeared. At first, they were simple patches that could distinguish light from dark, helping organisms orient themselves. But even this crude vision provided an advantage. Natural selection favored improvements, and over millions of years, those patches deepened into cups, focusing light more precisely. Eventually, true eyes evolved, with lenses that could form images. The appearance of eyes transformed the evolutionary landscape. Predators could spot prey from a distance. Prey could detect approaching danger. An arms race began, driving the evolution of camouflage, speed, armor, and countless other adaptations. Eyes evolved independently dozens of times in different lineages, taking many forms, from the compound eyes of insects to the camera-like eyes of vertebrates. Each design is a solution to the problem of seeing, shaped by millions of years of trial and error. The fact that eyes exist at all is testament to evolution's creative power. Life moves to land plants, colonized land before animals, transforming barren continents into green landscapes. For the first 3 billion years of life on Earth, the continents were barren, rocky deserts, baked by the sun. All life existed in the oceans. But around 470 million years ago, plants began their conquest of the land. The first pioneers were simple, resembling modern mosses and liverworts. They had no roots, no leaves, no flowers, just small green shoots clinging to moist soil near water. They faced enormous challenges. On land, water is scarce, and ultraviolet radiation is intense. But plants developed solutions. They evolved waxy coatings to prevent water loss, root-like structures to anchor themselves and absorb moisture, and eventually, vascular tissues to transport water, nutrients through their bodies. As plants spread across the continents, they changed the planet. Their roots broke down rocks, creating soil. They absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, moderating the climate. They released oxygen, making the air more breathable. By 350 million years ago, vast forests covered the land, filled with giant ferns and primitive trees. These green carpets prepared the way for animals to follow, providing food and shelter in a world previously devoid of life. The first animals to walk on land were probably arthropods, resembling scorpions. The transition from water to land was one of the most significant events in animal evolution. The first to make this journey were arthropods, creatures with jointed legs and hard exoskeletons. Fossils suggest that scorpion-like animals were crawling on land by 430 million years ago. hunting the small invertebrates that had already colonized the shores. These early pioneers faced the same challenges as plants: desiccation, intense sunlight, and gravity, which felt much stronger without the buoyancy of water. Their hard exoskeletons helped prevent water loss, and their segmented bodies and jointed limbs were well suited for walking. Later, other arthropods followed: millipedes munching on decaying plant matter, primitive insects taking to the air. The land gradually filled with life, creating ecosystems unlike anything in the oceans. These early terrestrial animals were small and simple, but they established the foundation for all land-dwelling animals that would come after, including the vertebrates that would eventually dominate the continents. Amphibians were the first vertebrates to emerge from the water onto land. Around 365 million years ago, a group of lobe-finned fish living in shallow, oxygen-poor swamps faced a dilemma. Their watery habitats often dried up or became too stagnant to support life. Some of these fish had lungs as well as gills, allowing them to breathe air. They also had muscular, lobed fins that could support their weight, enabling them to drag themselves across mudflats to find new pools. Over millions of years, natural selection favored those individuals best able to move on land. Their fins gradually evolved into limbs with fingers and toes. Their bodies became stronger, better able to support themselves against gravity. These transitional forms, neither fully fish nor fully amphibian, left fossils like Tiktaalik, a creature with the head and body of a crocodile, but the fins of a fish. Eventually, true amphibians emerged, able to live on land, but still tied to water for reproduction. They were the first vertebrates to hear the sounds of the land, to feel the sun directly on their skin, to explore a world previously forbidden to their ancestors. Early tetrapods had more than 5 fingers, with evolution settling on 5 as optimal. When the first vertebrates crawled onto land, their limbs were still experimental. Fossils of early tetrapods show some species had 7 or 8 digits on each limb, while others had 6. There was no standard body plan yet, no established rule. But over time, natural selection settled on 5 as the optimal number. 5 digits provided a good balance between functionality and efficiency, enough flexibility and gripping power, without the metabolic cost of maintaining extra digits. Once this pattern was established in the common ancestor of modern tetrapods, it stuck. Today, nearly all land vertebrates, from frogs to birds to humans, have limbs based on the 5-digit plan, even if some digits have been reduced or lost. A horse's hoof, for example, is a single enlarged digit, with the other 4 reduced to tiny remnants. A bat's wing is a hand with elongated fingers. Our own hands and feet follow the same ancient blueprint. It's a reminder that evolution builds on what already exists, modifying old structures rather than designing new ones from scratch. The age of reptiles. Reptiles evolved waterproof eggs, freeing them from dependence on water. Amphibians were successful on land, but they had one major limitation. They had to return to water to lay their eggs. Their offspring, tadpoles or larvae, developed in ponds and streams, vulnerable to drought and predators. But around 320 million years ago, a group of amphibians evolved a revolutionary adaptation, the amniotic egg. This egg had a hard or leathery shell that prevented it from drying out, and it contained everything a developing embryo needed: a food supply, a waste disposal system, and protective membranes to cushion the embryo and allow it to breathe. With this innovation, vertebrates were finally free from the water. They could lay eggs on land, in deserts, forests, and mountains. This gave rise to the reptiles, a diverse group that would come to dominate the planet. Reptiles spread rapidly, evolving into countless forms. Some became swift hunters, others developed armor for defense. Still others took to the air or returned to the sea. The amniotic egg was one of evolution's most important inventions, a key that unlocked the continents and allowed vertebrates to thrive in nearly every terrestrial environment. Dinosaurs dominated the Earth for over 160 million years. Around 230 million years ago, a new group of reptiles appeared, the dinosaurs. At first, they were small, overshadowed by other reptiles. But after a mass extinction event wiped out many competing species, dinosaurs rose to prominence. For the next 160 million years, they ruled the land. They evolved into an astonishing variety of forms. There were massive sauropods like Brachiosaurus, with long necks stretching to the treetops. There were armored giants like Ankylosaurus, with bony plates and club-like tails. There were swift predators like Velociraptor and enormous hunters like Tyrannosaurus rex. Some dinosaurs were covered in feathers, the ancestors of modern birds. Others had elaborate crests and horns used for display. Dinosaurs were not slow, dim-witted reptiles. Many were active, intelligent, and social, living in herds or packs. They cared for their young, built nests, and communicated with calls and visual signals. Their success was unparalleled. For comparison, modern humans have existed for only about 300,000 years. Dinosaurs thrived for more than 500 times longer, a testament to their adaptability and evolutionary success. Some dinosaurs were feathered, and birds are their direct descendants. For many years, dinosaurs were imagined as scaly, reptilian creatures. But beginning in the 1992, paleontologists discovered something remarkable. Many dinosaurs had feathers. At first, the evidence came from small theropods in China, fossils so well preserved that impressions of feathers were visible in the rock. Then, more discoveries followed. It became clear that feathers were widespread among dinosaurs, especially in the group that includes modern birds. Feathers likely evolved first for insulation, keeping small dinosaurs warm. Later, they were adapted for display, with bright colors and patterns used to attract mates or intimidate rivals. Eventually, in one lineage of small, agile dinosaurs, feathers became large and stiff enough to support flight. These creatures were the ancestors of birds. Birds did not evolve from dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, the only lineage to survive the mass extinction 66 million years ago. When you see a sparrow or an eagle, you are looking at a living dinosaur, a direct descendant of the creatures that once walked alongside Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops. Evolution did not end with the dinosaurs. It continues in every bird that sings at dawn. The largest creatures to ever walk on land were sauropod dinosaurs. Imagine a creature so massive that the ground shakes with each step. Sauropods like Argentinosaurus, Patagotitan, and Brachiosaurus were the largest land animals that have ever existed, some weighing as much as 70 tons, the equivalent of 10 elephants. They achieved these sizes through several adaptations. Their bones were filled with air pockets, reducing weight while maintaining strength. They had efficient respiratory systems similar to modern birds, providing plenty of oxygen to fuel their enormous bodies. Their long necks allowed them to reach vegetation other herbivores couldn't access, giving them an abundant food supply. But being so large came with challenges. They generated tremendous heat just from their metabolism and had to carefully regulate their body temperature. They moved slowly, their massive weight making agility impossible. Yet their size also provided protection. Few predators could threaten a fully grown sauropod. These gentle giants wandered in herds across ancient landscapes, shaping ecosystems wherever they went, trampling paths through forests and leaving vast quantities of fertilizer that nourished the soil. They represent the extreme limits of evolution's ability to build large terrestrial bodies. The Great Extinction's life has endured 5 major mass extinctions over its history. Earth's history is punctuated by catastrophes, times when the majority of species vanished in geologically brief periods. Scientists recognize 5 major mass extinctions. The first, at the end of the Ordovician period 445 million years ago, killed about 85% of species, likely due to rapid climate change. The late Devonian extinction 375 million years ago devastated marine life. The Permian Triassic extinction 252 million years ago was the worst of all, eliminating an estimated 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial species. It's called the Great Dying. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction 201 million years ago cleared the way for dinosaurs to dominate. And the most famous, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction 66 million years ago ended the age of dinosaurs. Each extinction reshaped the planet, removing dominant groups and allowing new ones to rise. Mass extinctions are tragedies, erasing millions of years of evolutionary history, but they also create opportunities. In the aftermath, surviving species diversify rapidly, filling empty ecological niches. Without mass extinctions, the history of life would look very different. Humans might never have evolved at all. The Permian extinction killed over 90% of all species on Earth. The worst catastrophe in life's history occurred 252 million years ago at the end of the Permian period. In a span of perhaps 60,000 years, an eye blink in geological time, more than 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species disappeared. The oceans became nearly lifeless. Forests vanished. The planet became a wasteland. What caused such devastation? Evidence points to massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia, which spewed lava over an area the size of Europe. These eruptions released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, causing rapid global warming, ocean acidification, and acid rain. Oxygen levels in the oceans plummeted, suffocating most marine life. On land, temperatures soared, and ecosystems collapsed. Life came perilously close to total extinction. Recovery took millions of years. New species slowly evolved to fill empty niches, but the world was fundamentally changed. Groups that had dominated the Permian disappeared forever, replaced by new forms. The extinction reminds us how fragile life can be, how quickly millions of years of evolution can be undone by catastrophic environmental change. The asteroid impact that ended the dinosaurs left a crater 180 kilometers wide. 66 million years ago, the reign of the dinosaurs ended in a single day. A massive asteroid, about 10 kilometers across, struck the Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. It vaporized the asteroid and a huge volume of rock, creating a crater 180 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep. The immediate effects were catastrophic. A fireball expanded outward, igniting forests across continents. A colossal tsunami swept across the oceans. But the long-term effects were even worse. The impact threw trillions of tons of dust and debris into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight for months or years. Temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis stopped. Plants died, followed by the herbivores that depended on them, and then the predators that fed on herbivores. The food chains collapsed. About 75% of all species went extinct, including all non-avian dinosaurs. Only small, adaptable creatures survived. Mammals hiding in burrows, birds that could migrate, reptiles that could survive on scarce resources. The world that emerged from this catastrophe was empty and ready for new life to take over. Small mammals survived the extinction by sheltering underground. When the asteroid struck, most large animals perished. But small mammals, no bigger than rats or opossums, survived in burrows and caves, sheltered from the immediate devastation. They could subsist on insects, seeds, and roots, foods that remained available even when larger ecosystems collapsed. These humble survivors were the ancestors of all modern mammals, including humans. In the aftermath of the extinction, with the dinosaurs gone, mammals began to diversify. They emerged from the shadows and grew larger, filling ecological roles previously occupied by dinosaurs. Within 10 million years, mammals had evolved into a stunning variety of forms: herbivores, carnivores, tree dwellers, burrowers, and swimmers. They developed complex social behaviors, advanced brains, and eventually, in some lineages, remarkable intelligence. The extinction that destroyed the dinosaurs was a tragedy, but it was also an opportunity. Without it, mammals might have remained small and inconspicuous, overshadowed by reptilian giants. The asteroid that ended one era began another, setting the stage for the eventual evolution of primates and humans. The rise of mammals. Mammals evolved from reptilian ancestors over 200 million years ago. Long before dinosaurs dominated, a group of reptiles called synapsids roamed the Earth. These creatures had some mammal-like features: differentiated teeth, a more upright stance, and possibly even whiskers and fur. Over tens of millions of years, they gradually became more mammalian. They developed a more efficient metabolism, allowing them to maintain a constant body temperature. They evolved specialized teeth for cutting, tearing, and grinding food. They developed a secondary palate, allowing them to breathe while eating. They cared for their young more attentively than most reptiles. By about 200 million years ago, true mammals had appeared. They were small, mostly nocturnal creatures living in the shadow of the dinosaurs. For over 100 million years, they remained small, but they were slowly perfecting adaptations that would later prove crucial. Warm-bloodedness, fur for insulation, keen senses, and a large brain relative to their body size. When the dinosaurs disappeared, mammals were ready to inherit the Earth. Their success shows that evolution often works slowly, accumulating small advantages over vast periods, waiting for the moment when those advantages become decisive. Early mammals were small and mostly nocturnal, avoiding dinosaur predators. During the age of dinosaurs, mammals were the underdogs. They were small, most no larger than a mouse or shrew. They lived in burrows, crevices, and hollow trees, emerging mainly at night to forage. This nocturnal lifestyle was likely a survival strategy. By being active when dinosaurs were resting, mammals avoided predation, but this lifestyle also shaped their evolution. Living in darkness, mammals came to rely heavily on hearing and smell rather than vision. Many developed excellent night vision or echolocation. Their whiskers became sensitive touch organs. Their brains enlarged to process complex sensory information. These adaptations, developed in response to the challenges of nocturnal life, later proved advantageous when mammals diversified into daytime niches. Our own ancestors were among these small nocturnal mammals, scurrying through the underbrush while dinosaurs ruled above. The keen senses and large brains we inherited can be traced back to this humble existence. a reminder that even limitations can drive evolutionary innovation. Mammals are defined by mammary glands, fur, and specialized teeth. What makes a mammal a mammal? All mammals share certain key features. They have hair or fur at some point in their lives, providing insulation. They produce milk to nourish their young, secreted by specialized mammary glands. They have 3 middle ear bones that amplify sound, giving them excellent hearing. They have differentiated teeth, specialized for different functions: incisors for cutting, canines for tearing, molars for grinding. Most mammals give birth to live. Young, though a few, like the platypus and echidna, still lay eggs, a reminder of their reptilian ancestry. Mammals are also warm-blooded, maintaining a constant internal temperature regardless of the environment. This allows them to be active in a wide range of climates, but requires a steady supply of food to fuel their metabolism. These shared features are the result of a common evolutionary history. Every mammal, from the tiniest shrew to the largest whale, from bats to elephants, carries these signatures of mammalian ancestry. We are all part of the same great lineage, modified in countless ways by millions of years of adaptation to different environments. Whales evolved from land-dwelling mammals that returned to the sea. One of evolution's most dramatic transformations is the evolution of whales. These massive marine mammals descended from small, hoofed land animals similar to modern deer. About 50 million years ago, some of these animals began spending more time in water, perhaps hunting fish in rivers and coastal shallows. Over millions of years, natural selection favored traits that improved their aquatic lifestyle. Their legs became shorter and more paddle-like. Their tails broadened into flukes for propulsion. Their nostrils moved to the top of their heads, becoming blowholes. Their bodies became streamlined. Eventually, their hind limbs disappeared entirely, though vestigial leg bones still exist deep within their bodies. Transitional fossils document this transformation beautifully. Pachycetus, an early ancestor, was a wolf-sized creature that could walk on land and swim. Ambulocetus had webbed feet and hunted in shallow water. Dorudon was almost fully aquatic, with tiny, useless hind limbs. Today's whales are so well adapted to the sea that they cannot survive on land. Yet their skeletons, their embryonic development, and their DNA all reveal their terrestrial origins. A stunning example of evolution's power to reshape bodies over time. Some mammals evolved to fly, becoming bats with webbed wings. Around 50 million years ago, some small mammals took to the air. They were the ancestors of bats, the only mammals capable of true powered flight. How did this happen? These early mammals probably lived in trees, leaping from branch to branch. Natural selection favored those with extra skin between their limbs, which acted like a parachute, allowing longer, more controlled glides. Over time, their fingers elongated, and the skin stretched between them became larger and more flexible, forming wings. Their bones became lighter, their chest muscles stronger. They developed echolocation, emitting high-pitched sounds and listening for echoes, allowing them to navigate and hunt in complete darkness. Today, bats are incredibly diverse, with over 1,400 species. Some feed on insects, others on fruit, nectar, or even blood. They play crucial roles in ecosystems, pollinating plants, dispersing seeds, and controlling insect populations. Bats show that evolution can take an ordinary mammalian body plan and transform it into something extraordinary, creating abilities that seem almost magical, yet arise from gradual, step-by-step changes. Primate evolution. Primates evolved hands and feet, adapted for grasping tree branches. Our own evolutionary story begins with small, tree-dwelling mammals, called primates. About 65 million years ago, shortly after the dinosaurs disappeared, some mammals adapted to life in the trees. Living in the canopy required excellent balance, coordination, and the ability to grip branches. Natural selection favored hands and feet with flexible fingers and toes, rather than claws. These grasping appendages allowed primates to hold onto branches securely, manipulate objects, and gather food. Primates also developed excellent depth perception. Their eyes moved to the front of their heads, providing overlapping fields of vision that allowed them to judge distances accurately, crucial for leaping between branches. They evolved larger brains to process complex visual and motor information. Early primates were small, resembling modern lemurs or tarsiers. They ate insects, fruit, and leaves. From these humble beginnings, the primate lineage diversified, eventually giving rise to monkeys, apes, and humans. Every time you grip a tool, climb a ladder, or judge the distance to a target, you are using abilities inherited from these early tree-dwelling ancestors. Forward-facing eyes gave primates excellent depth perception for life in trees. One of the most distinctive features of primates is their forward-facing eyes. Unlike most mammals, whose eyes are on the sides of their heads, providing a wide field of view, primates have eyes that face forward. This means the fields of vision from each eye overlap significantly, creating stereoscopic vision. The brain combines the slightly different images from each eye to perceive depth accurately. This adaptation was crucial for life in the trees. Misjudging the distance to a branch could mean a fatal fall. With excellent depth perception, primates could leap confidently, knowing exactly where they would land. They could grab fruit hanging from thin branches or snatch insects out of the air. This reliance on vision shaped primate evolution profoundly. Primates became highly visual creatures, with brains dedicated to processing visual information. Color vision evolved, helping them identify ripe fruit and young leaves. These visual abilities, developed for navigating the treetops, later became essential for tool use, social communication, and the complex cognitive tasks that characterize humans. Our closest living relatives are chimpanzees and bonobos, sharing about 98% of our DNA. Humans did not evolve from modern apes. Instead, we share a common ancestor with them. Our closest living relatives are chimpanzees and bonobos, two species of African great apes. Genetic studies show that we share about 99% of our DNA with them. This means that about 6 to 7 million years ago, a single ancestral species split into two lineages, one leading to modern chimps and bonobos, the other leading to humans. This close relationship is visible not just in genetics, but in anatomy, behavior, and cognition. Like us, chimpanzees use tools, solve problems, and live in complex social groups. They experience emotions, form friendships, and engage in politics and warfare. They can learn sign language and understand symbolic communication. Bonobos are more peaceful, resolving conflicts through social bonding rather than aggression. Studying these species helps us understand which traits are uniquely human and which are shared with our common ancestors. It reminds us that we are not separate from the natural world, but part of it, one branch among many on the tree of life. Humans belong to a group called hominins that includes all bipedal apes. After the split from the chimp lineage, a new group emerged, the hominins. These were upright walking apes, distinguished by bipedalism, the ability to walk on two legs. Over the next several million years, multiple hominin species evolved in Africa. Some, like Australopithecus, were small and still spent time in trees. Others, like Paranthropus, had massive jaws for chewing tough vegetation. Many of these species coexisted, sharing the landscape. At certain points in history, 3 or 4 different hominin species lived at the same time. Most eventually went extinct, leaving no descendants. But one lineage persisted and evolved into the genus Homo, which includes modern humans. Bipedalism was the key adaptation that defined hominins. Walking upright freed the hands for carrying objects, using tools, and manipulating the environment. It allowed hominins to see over tall grass and travel long distances efficiently. It changed the shape of the pelvis, skull, and spine. Bipedalism was not a sudden leap but a gradual transition, with fossils showing intermediate forms. It set hominins on a path that would eventually lead to us. Walking upright freed the hands, which later enabled tool use and complex manipulation. Why did hominins become bipedal? Several theories have been proposed. Perhaps walking upright was more energy efficient for traveling long distances across the African savanna. Perhaps it helped regulate body temperature by reducing the amount of skin exposed to the sun. Perhaps it allowed early hominins to carry food back to a home base. Whatever the initial advantage, bipedalism had profound consequences. With their hands freed from locomotion, hominins could carry tools, weapons, and food. They could gather more resources and transport them over long distances. Eventually, they began making tools. At first, simple stone flakes for cutting, later, more complex implements. Tool use and bipedalism reinforced each other. As tools became more important, natural selection favored individuals with hands better suited for precise manipulation. Fingers became more dexterous. Thumbs became more opposable. Brains grew larger to coordinate complex hand movements and plan tool-making strategies. Bipedalism, initially just a different way of walking, unlocked a cascade of evolutionary changes that transformed hominins into something unique: human origins. The earliest stone tools date back about 3.3 million years. For most of our evolutionary history, hominins did not make tools. They used sticks and stones found in nature, as some apes still do today. But about 3.3 million years ago, something changed. In Kenya, archaeologists discovered the oldest known stone tools, deliberately shaped by striking one rock against another to create sharp edges. These simple tools, just flakes and cores, were revolutionary. They allowed hominins to butcher animal carcasses, accessing meat and marrow that would otherwise be difficult to obtain. Meat provided concentrated calories and nutrients, fueling the evolution of larger brains. Tool use also required planning, foresight, and fine motor control. Over time, tools became more sophisticated. Different types were created for different purposes: scrapers, hand axes, spear points. Toolmaking became a learned skill, passed down through generations. It was a form of culture, information transmitted not through genes, but through teaching and imitation. The invention of stone tools marked a turning point in hominin evolution. It set us on a path of increasing reliance on technology, a path we continue to follow today. The genus Homo emerged around 2.8 million years ago in Africa. About 2.8 million years ago, a new type of hominin appeared in the fossil record. This was the genus Homo, characterized by larger brains, smaller teeth, and more advanced tool use compared to earlier hominins. The first species, Homo habilis, or handy man, had a brain about half the size of modern humans, but was clever enough to make simple stone tools. These early humans were still small, standing, about 4 feet tall. They lived in Africa, in environments ranging from woodlands to open savannas. They likely scavenged meat from predator kills and gathered plant foods. Over the next 2 million years, multiple Homo species evolved. Homo erectus stood fully upright, had a brain 2/3 the size of ours, and was the first hominin to leave Africa, spreading across Asia and possibly reaching Europe. Homo heidelbergensis may have been the common ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern humans. Each species represented experiments in being human, different solutions to the challenges of survival. Most went extinct, but they were all part of our story. Branches on the human family tree. Brain size tripled over the course of human evolution. One of the most remarkable trends in human evolution is the dramatic increase in brain size. Early hominins like Australopithecus had brains about 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, similar to modern chimpanzees. By the time Homo habilis appeared, brains had grown to about 600 cubic centimeters. Homo erectus had brains around 900 cubic centimeters. Neanderthals and modern humans have brains averaging 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. In just a few million years, our brains tripled in size. Why did this happen? Larger brains provided cognitive advantages, better problem solving, more sophisticated tool use, improved social skills, and the ability to plan for the future. But large brains are expensive. They consume about 20% of our energy, even though they represent only 2% of body weight. They also create challenges for childbirth, as a large-brained infant must pass through the mother's pelvis. The benefits must have outweighed these costs. Natural selection favored intelligence, and once the trend began, it fed on itself. Smarter individuals made better tools, found more food, and had more offspring, passing on genes for larger brains. Homo erectus was the first hominin to control fire and migrate out of Africa. Homo erectus was a pivotal species in human evolution. Appearing about 1.9 million years ago, they were the first hominins to look truly human, with long legs, short arms, and a body adapted for long-distance walking and running. They made more sophisticated tools than their predecessors, including symmetrical hand axes that required planning and skill to create. Most significantly, Homo erectus was the first hominin to control fire. Evidence of controlled fire use dates back at least 1 million years, possibly earlier. Fire provided warmth, protection from predators, light after dark, and the ability to cook food. Cooking made food easier to digest and safer to eat, providing more calories and nutrients to fuel growing brains. Homo erectus was also the first hominin to leave Africa. Fossils have been found in Georgia, China, Indonesia, and elsewhere across Asia. They adapted to diverse environments, from tropical forests to temperate grasslands. Some populations of Homo erectus survived until about 100,000 years ago, overlapping with modern humans. They were successful, adaptable, and intelligent, representing a major step toward humanity as we know it. Neanderthals were intelligent, cultured humans who lived in Europe and Asia. Neanderthals often get a bad reputation, portrayed as brutish and primitive, but the evidence tells a different story. They were a species of human, Homo neanderthalensis, that evolved in Europe and Western Asia between 400,000 and 40,000 years ago. They were stocky and muscular, adaptations to the cold Ice Age climates they inhabited, but they were far from primitive. Neanderthals had brains as large as or larger than modern humans. They made sophisticated stone tools, including composite tools with wooden handles. They controlled fire, built shelters, and wore clothing made from animal skins. They cared for their sick and elderly, as shown by fossils of individuals who survived serious injuries that would have been fatal without help. They buried their dead, sometimes with flowers or grave goods, suggesting symbolic thought and perhaps belief in an afterlife. They may have created art, decorating shells and cave walls with pigments. Recent genetic studies show that Neanderthals interbred with modern humans when the two species met in Europe and the Middle East. Today, people of non-African descent carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Neanderthals were not evolutionary failures. They were our cousins, intelligent and adaptable, who contributed to our genetic heritage. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. Our own species, Homo sapiens, arose in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. The oldest fossils that clearly belong to our species come from Morocco and date to about 315,000 years ago. These early Homo sapiens looked different from people today, with longer, flatter skulls, but they were unmistakably human. For over 200,000 years, Homo sapiens remained in Africa, living in small groups, hunting, gathering, and slowly developing more sophisticated tools and behaviors. Then, around 70,000 years ago, something changed. Human populations began to expand rapidly. They developed new technologies, finely crafted stone blades, bone tools, needles for sewing clothing. They created art, carving figurines, and painting on cave walls. They made jewelry from shells and beads. They buried their dead with care. This flowering of culture and technology is sometimes called the Great Leap Forward. Humans began to migrate out of Africa in waves, eventually spreading across the entire planet. By 15,000 years ago, humans had reached every continent except Antarctica. What made Homo sapiens so successful? Perhaps it was our capacity for symbolic thought, language, and complex social cooperation. Whatever the reason, we became the last surviving hominin species. Humans reached every continent through a series of great migrations. The story of how humans populated the world is one of courage, adaptability, and endless wandering. The first modern humans to leave Africa crossed into the Middle East around 120,000 years ago, but this early migration failed. A second, more successful wave occurred around 70,000 years ago. From the Middle East, humans spread in multiple directions. Some moved east across southern Asia, reaching Australia by about 65,000 years ago, a journey that required building boats and navigating open ocean. Others moved north into Europe, encountering and eventually replacing Neanderthals. Still others pushed into Central Asia and eventually into Siberia. Around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, when sea levels were lower during the Ice Age, humans crossed from Siberia into Alaska via a land bridge called Beringia. From there, they spread southward through the Americas, reaching the southern tip of South America within a few thousand years. Each migration required adapting to new environments, new climates, new food sources. Humans proved remarkably flexible, developing specialized tools, clothing, and survival strategies for deserts, rainforests, tundra, and mountains. Today, we are a global species, present in nearly every terrestrial environment on Earth. Different human populations evolved distinct physical traits in response to local environments. As humans spread across the world, they encountered vastly different environments. Natural selection acted on populations in different ways, leading to the evolution of distinct physical traits. In regions with intense sunlight, like equatorial Africa, dark skin evolved to protect against ultraviolet radiation, which can damage DNA and cause skin cancer. In northern latitudes, where sunlight is less intense, lighter skin evolved to allow better synthesis of vitamin D, which requires UV light. Body proportions also changed. People living in hot climates tend to have long, slender limbs that help dissipate heat. Those in cold climates tend to have shorter, stockier builds that conserve heat. At high altitudes, populations evolved adaptations for low oxygen levels. Tibetans, for example, have genetic changes that improve oxygen delivery to tissues. These variations are superficial, affecting appearance but not fundamental biology. All humans belong to the same species and can interbreed. The genetic diversity between any two human populations is tiny compared to the variation within populations. Race, as commonly understood, has no biological basis. We are one species, recently separated by geography, with minor adaptations to local conditions. Language likely evolved between 50,000 and 200,000 years ago. One of the most distinctive human traits is language, our ability to communicate using complex symbolic systems. But when did language evolve? We don't know for certain, because language doesn't fossilize. However, we can make educated guesses based on anatomy and archaeology. The shape of the skull, the position of the larynx, and the size of the hypoglossal canal, which carries nerves to the tongue, all affect speech ability. Fossils suggest that Homo heidelbergensis, living around 500,000 years ago, may have had some capacity for speech. Modern humans have a gene called FOXP2, mutations in which cause severe language impairments. Neanderthals had the same version of this gene, suggesting they may have had language too. Archaeological evidence of complex culture, art, and long-distance trade, all of which require communication, appears strongly by 50,000 years ago. Language transformed human evolution. It allowed detailed transmission of knowledge across generations. It enabled cooperation on a scale impossible for other animals. It allowed planning, storytelling, and abstract thought. Language made us uniquely human, capable of accumulating culture and building on the achievements of previous generations. Mechanisms of evolution. Natural selection is the process where advantageous traits become more common. Evolution works through several stead mechanisms, but the most important is natural selection. The concept is simple but profound. Individuals within a population vary in their traits. Some of these traits are heritable, passed from parents to offspring through genes. In any environment, some traits help survival and reproduction more than others. Individuals with advantageous traits are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those traits to the next generation. Over time, advantageous traits become more common, while disadvantageous traits become rarer. This process, repeated over countless generations, leads to adaptation, the fit between organisms and their environments. Natural selection is not a conscious process. It has no goals or foresight. It is simply the inevitable result of variation, inheritance, and differential reproductive success. Darwin recognized this in the 19th century, and it remains the cornerstone of evolutionary biology. Natural selection explains the diversity of life, from the camouflage of insects to the intelligence of dolphins. It is nature's way of editing the genetic information passed between generations, preserving what works and discarding what doesn't. Mutations are random changes in DNA that provide the raw material for evolution. Where does variation come from? The ultimate source is mutation, random changes in DNA sequences. Mutations occur when DNA is copied incorrectly during cell division, or when it is damaged by radiation, chemicals, or errors in repair mechanisms. Most mutations have no effect, occurring in non-coding regions of the genome. Some are harmful, disrupting important genes and reducing survival. But a few are beneficial, providing new abilities or improving existing ones. These beneficial mutations are the raw material for evolution. Without mutation, there would be no variation. And without variation, natural selection would have nothing to work with. Mutations occur constantly, at a slow but steady rate. In humans, each person is born with about 60 new mutations not present in their parents. Most are harmless, but over millions of years, these tiny changes accumulate. They create the diversity we see in nature, the differences between species and the variation within them. Mutation is random, but evolution is not. Natural selection sorts through mutations, preserving the beneficial ones and eliminating the harmful ones. Genetic drift causes evolution through random chance in small populations. Not all evolution is adaptive. Sometimes populations change simply due to random chance, a process called genetic drift. In small populations, random events can have large effects. Imagine a population of 20 beetles, 10 green and 10 brown. If a falling tree randomly crushes 5 green beetles, the population is now 10 brown and 5 green, not because brown is better, but simply by accident. Over generations, random deaths and births can cause some traits to disappear and others to become fixed, even if they provide no advantage. Genetic drift is especially important in small populations, such as endangered species or populations that have recently colonized a new area. It can lead to the loss of genetic diversity, making populations more vulnerable to disease and environmental change. Genetic drift also explains why some neutral traits, like blood type variations, differ between populations. Evolution is not just about survival of the fittest. Chance plays a role too, reminding us that history is contingent, shaped by accidents as much as by necessity. Gene flow occurs when individuals migrate between populations, mixing genes. Populations of the same species are not isolated. Individuals sometimes migrate from one population to another, bringing their genes with them. This movement, called gene flow or migration, mixes the genetic makeup of populations. Gene flow can introduce new traits, increasing diversity. It can also make populations more similar, counteracting the effects of natural selection and genetic drift that would otherwise cause them to diverge. In humans, gene flow has been constant throughout history. As people traveled, traded, and intermarried, they exchanged genes. This is why humans show clinal variation, gradual changes in traits across geography, rather than sharp divisions. Gene flow also explains why humans have so little genetic diversity compared to other species. We are a young species, recently spread across the world, with constant mixing between populations. Gene flow is a homogenizing force, working against speciation. But when populations are separated by geography or behavior, gene flow stops, and populations can diverge, eventually becoming distinct species. Sexual selection drives traits that improve mating success, not survival. Darwin recognized a second form of selection that operates not through survival, but through reproduction. Sexual selection favors traits that improve an individual's ability to attract mates and reproduce. Sometimes these traits are actually harmful to survival, but are maintained because they increase reproductive success. The classic example is the peacock's tail. It is large, colorful, and conspicuous, making the peacock more visible to predators. But females prefer males with larger, more elaborate tails. Males with impressive tails mate more often and have more offspring, passing on genes for showy tails. Over generations, tails become even more elaborate. Sexual selection can take two forms. In intersexual selection, one sex, usually females, chooses mates based on certain traits. In intrasexual selection, members of one sex, usually males, compete with each other for access to mates. The antlers of deer, the manes of lions, and the elaborate songs of many birds are all products of sexual selection. In humans, sexual selection may have shaped traits like smooth skin, facial symmetry, and perhaps even intelligence and creativity. Co-evolution occurs when two species evolve in response to each other. Evolution does not happen in isolation. Species interact, and these interactions can drive reciprocal evolutionary changes. This is co-evolution. A classic example is the relationship between flowering plants and their pollinators. Plants evolved bright colors, sweet nectar, and distinctive scents to attract insects, birds, and bats. In turn, pollinators evolved traits that help them access flowers: long tongues in butterflies, specialized beaks in hummingbirds, keen color vision in bees. Each species shapes the evolution of the other. Predator-prey relationships also co-evolve. As prey evolve better defenses, predators evolve better offense, leading to evolutionary arms races. The poison dart frog's toxins evolved in response to predators, and some predators evolved resistance to those toxins. Parasites and hosts co-evolve continuously. Hosts evolve immune defenses, and parasites evolve ways to evade them. Co-evolution creates intricate webs of interaction and dependence. It is one reason why ecosystems are so complex and interconnected. No species evolves alone. We all evolve together, shaping and shaped by the other species around us. Convergent evolution produces similar traits in unrelated species facing similar challenges. Sometimes, evolution repeats itself. Different lineages, facing similar environmental challenges, independently evolve similar solutions. This is called convergent evolution. The classic example is flight. Flight evolved independently in insects, pterosaurs, birds, and bats, all using different starting materials but arriving at wings. Another example is the streamlined body shape of sharks, dolphins, and ichthyosaurs. These animals are not closely related. One is a fish, one a mammal, one an extinct reptile, but all evolved similar shapes for swimming efficiently. Eyes have evolved independently dozens of times. Camera-like eyes exist in vertebrates and octopuses, even though the two groups are very distantly related. Convergent evolution shows that there are often optimal solutions to environmental challenges. The same problems lead to the same answers, even in completely different lineages. It also reminds us that evolution is not infinitely creative. It is constrained by physics, chemistry, and the materials available. Different paths can lead to similar destinations. Vestigial structures are remnants of features that were useful in ancestors. Evolution builds on what already exists. It cannot start from scratch. Sometimes this leaves behind evidence of evolutionary history. Vestigial structures, body parts that no longer serve their original function. In humans, the appendix is a small pouch attached to the large intestine. It serves little purpose today, but in herbivorous ancestors, it probably helped digest plant material. Wisdom teeth are another example. Our jaws are smaller than those of our ancestors, leaving no room for these extra molars. The tiny muscles that make your ears wiggle are vestiges from ancestors who could swivel their ears to detect sounds. Whales have tiny pelvic bones buried in their bodies, remnants of the legs their land-dwelling ancestors once had. Snakes have similar vestigial hip bones. These structures are not perfectly designed. They are the result of tinkering, modifications of existing features. Vestigial structures are powerful evidence for evolution. They make sense only in light of ancestry, revealing the history written in our bodies. Embryonic development reveals evolutionary relationships between species. Embryos provide some of the most compelling evidence for evolution. In early development, the embryos of very different animals often look remarkably similar. Human embryos, for a brief time, have gill slits, a tail, and a coat of fine hair called lanugo. These features reflect our evolutionary history. Gill slits are remnants from fish ancestors, the tail from mammalian ancestors with tails. As development proceeds, species-specific features appear and embryos diverge. But the similarities early in development reflect shared ancestry. This is because evolution modifies development. Small changes early in development can have large effects on the adult form. Natural selection acts on these developmental changes, leading to new body plans. The study of how development evolves is called evo-devo. It has revealed that many of the same genes control development across very different animals. The genes that build an insect's body are similar to those that build a mouse. Evolution conserves what works, modifying existing genetic programs rather than inventing new ones from scratch. The diversity of life. Life is divided into three domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. All life on Earth falls into three great groups called domains. Bacteria are single-celled organisms with simple structure, lacking a nucleus. They are incredibly diverse and abundant, living in virtually every environment from deep-sea vents to Antarctic ice to your own intestines. Archaea are also single-celled and superficially similar to bacteria, but they are fundamentally different in their biochemistry. Many archaea live in extreme environments: hot springs, salt lakes, deep ocean vents. They are called extremophiles, lovers of extremes. The third domain, eukarya, includes all organisms with complex cells containing nuclei. This domain includes all animals, plants, fungi, and protists. The three domains diverged from a common ancestor billions of years ago, and their differences reveal the deep structure of the tree of life. Despite these differences, all three domains share the same basic genetic code and biochemistry, evidence of their common origin. The diversity of life is immense, but all of it traces back to a single beginning. Bacteria are the most abundant and diverse organisms on Earth. Bacteria may be invisible to the naked eye, but they are the dominant form of life on Earth. There are more bacteria in a handful of soil than there are humans on the planet. They live everywhere, in oceans, soil, air, and ice. They thrive in boiling hot springs and frozen tundra. They live deep in the Earth's crust, miles below the surface. They even live inside other organisms, including you. Your body contains trillions of bacteria, outnumbering your own cells. Most are harmless or beneficial, helping digest food, produce vitamins, and protect against disease. Bacteria are also incredibly diverse. They come in many shapes: spheres, rods, spirals, stars. They obtain energy in countless ways, from sunlight, from chemicals, from other organisms. Some bacteria cause disease, but most are essential to life on Earth. They recycle nutrients, breaking down dead matter and returning elements to the soil and water. They fix nitrogen from the air, making it available to plants. Without bacteria, ecosystems would collapse. They have been evolving for over 3 billion years, and they will likely be here long after larger organisms are gone. Plants evolved from aquatic algae around 500 million years ago. Plants are so familiar that it's easy to forget how remarkable they are. They are living solar panels, capturing energy from sunlight and converting it into chemical energy through photosynthesis. Plants evolved from green algae that lived in freshwater ponds and streams. Around 500 million years ago, some of these algae began colonizing land. It was a difficult transition. On land, water is scarce, sunlight is intense, and there is no buoyancy to support structures. Early plants developed adaptations to cope: waxy cuticles to prevent water loss, roots to absorb water and anchor the plant, and vascular tissues to transport water and nutrients. The first land plants were small and simple, resembling mosses, but over millions of years, plants grew larger and more complex. Trees evolved, with woody trunks and deep roots. Ferns, conifers, and eventually flowering plants appeared. Today, plants dominate the land, providing food and habitat for countless other species. They produce the oxygen we breathe and form the base of most terrestrial food webs. Our world would be unrecognizable without them. Flowering plants co-evolved with pollinating insects over millions of years. Flowering plants, or angiosperms, appeared around 140 million years ago and quickly became the dominant plants on land. Their success is partly due to their relationship with pollinators. Flowers are not just beautiful, they are advertisements, evolved to attract insects, birds, and bats. In exchange for nectar or pollen, these animals carry pollen from one flower to another, enabling reproduction. This partnership, co-evolution between plants and pollinators, has driven incredible diversity. Some flowers are shaped to fit specific pollinators. Orchids, for example, have evolved flowers that mimic female insects, tricking males into attempting to mate and picking up pollen in the process. Long-tubed flowers match the long tongues of moths and hummingbirds. Red flowers attract birds, which see red well but lack the scent detection of insects, so these flowers often have no fragrance. The co-evolution of flowers and pollinators is one of nature's most beautiful examples of reciprocal adaptation, a partnership that has shaped the living world. Fungi are more closely related to animals than to plants. Fungi are often overlooked, but they are a kingdom of their own, as distinct from plants as animals are. In fact, fungi are more closely related to animals than to plants. They share a common ancestor with animals that lived about 1 billion years ago. Fungi do not photosynthesize. Instead, they absorb nutrients from their surroundings, secreting enzymes to break down organic matter and absorbing the resulting molecules. They are nature's decomposers, recycling dead plants and animals back into the ecosystem. Without fungi, forests would be buried in dead wood and leaves. Fungi come in many forms. Mushrooms are just the reproductive structures, the tips of vast underground networks of thread-like hyphae that spread through soil or wood. Some fungi are single-celled, like yeasts. Others form partnerships with plant roots, called mycorrhizae, helping plants absorb nutrients in exchange for sugars. Fungi have given us antibiotics like penicillin, fermented foods like bread and beer, and they play crucial roles in ecosystems. They are ancient, diverse, and essential, though they live mostly hidden from view. Insects are the most diverse group of animals, with over 1 million known species. If you want to understand diversity, look to insects. They make up more than half of all known animal species, with over 1 million described and possibly millions more undiscovered. Insects are everywhere, in forests, deserts, grasslands, freshwater, and even the ocean surface. They range in size from tiny parasitic wasps smaller than a pinhead to giant beetles longer than your hand. They have colonized nearly every ecological niche. Some insects are herbivores, feeding on leaves, wood, nectar, or fruit. Others are predators or parasites. Still others are decomposers, breaking down dead matter. Insects evolved flight, one of the keys to their success, allowing them to disperse widely and exploit resources other animals couldn't reach. They evolved complex life cycles, with larvae and adults occupying different niches. They developed social behaviors, building hives, and working cooperatively. Insects are essential to ecosystems, pollinating plants, recycling nutrients, and serving as food for countless other animals. Their diversity is a testament to the power of evolution to fill every available space with life. The majority of animal species live in the ocean, where life began. The oceans cover more than 70% of Earth's surface, and they contain more than 70% of Earth's species. Marine life is astonishingly diverse. The ocean contains representatives of every major animal group, from sponges and corals to fish, whales, and sea turtles. Many groups exist only in the sea. All echinoderms, starfish, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers are marine. The oceans also contain most of Earth's biomass, in the form of tiny photosynthetic bacteria and plankton. These microscopic organisms produce much of the oxygen we breathe and form the base of ocean food webs. Life in the ocean faces different challenges than life on land. Water is denser, requiring different body shapes. Light penetrates only the upper layers, so deep-sea creatures live in perpetual darkness. Some have evolved bioluminescence, creating their own light. The ocean is three-dimensional, allowing movement in all directions. Marine life is so diverse and important that protecting the oceans is essential to preserving life on Earth. Many deep-sea creatures create their own light through bioluminescence. In the deep ocean, where sunlight never reaches, many creatures have evolved the ability to produce light. This is called bioluminescence, and it occurs through chemical reactions within specialized organs. Deep-sea fish use light for many purposes. Some have glowing lures to attract prey in the darkness. Others use flashing lights to startle predators or confuse them. Some species use patterns of bioluminescent spots to recognize members of their own species in the blackness. In the deep sea, bioluminescence is so common that it's estimated over 90% of deep-sea animals can produce light. The phenomenon is not limited to fish. Jellyfish, squid, shrimp, and even bacteria glow in the dark depths. Bioluminescence has evolved independently many times, a beautiful example of convergent evolution. The deep ocean is not a dead, empty place. It is alive with light, created not by the sun but by life itself, a hidden cosmos of glowing creatures drifting through the abyss. Evolution in action. Evolution continues today and can be observed in real time. Evolution is not just something that happened in the distant past. It is happening now, all around us. Scientists have documented evolution occurring over human lifetimes, sometimes in just a few generations. One famous example is the peppered moth in England. Before the Industrial Revolution, most peppered moths were light-colored, camouflaged against lichen-covered trees. As pollution darkened the trees, dark-colored moths became more common because they were better camouflaged from predators. When pollution controls were implemented and trees lightened again, light-colored moths returned to dominance. This shift, observed over just a few decades, is evolution by natural selection in action. Another example is antibiotic resistance in bacteria. When exposed to antibiotics, most bacteria die, but a few with resistance mutations survive and reproduce. Within years, antibiotic-resistant strains can dominate a rapid evolutionary response. Darwin's finches in the Galapagos have been observed evolving beak shapes in response to changes in available seeds. Evolution is not slow and imperceptible. It can be fast, observable, and measurable. Antibiotic resistance in bacteria is evolution happening before our eyes. One of the most concerning examples of ongoing evolution is antibiotic resistance. When antibiotics were first discovered, they were miracle drugs, curing infections that had once been deadly. But Bacteria evolve quickly. Within populations of billions, random mutations occasionally produce individuals resistant to a particular antibiotic. When that antibiotic is used, resistant bacteria survive, while susceptible ones die. The resistant bacteria reproduce, passing on resistance genes. Over time, resistant strains spread. Some bacteria have evolved resistance to multiple antibiotics, creating superbugs that are difficult or impossible to treat. This is natural selection in fast forward. Bacteria reproduce in minutes, so generations pass quickly, allowing rapid evolution. The overuse and misuse of antibiotics accelerate this process, creating strong selection pressure. Antibiotic resistance is a serious public health threat, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths annually. It is also a powerful demonstration that evolution is real, ongoing, and has practical consequences. Understanding evolution is essential to combating antibiotic resistance. Insects and weeds have evolved resistance to pesticides and herbicides. Antibiotic resistance is not unique to bacteria. Insects and weeds have also evolved resistance to the chemicals used to control them. When a pesticide is first applied to a crop, it kills most pests. But a few individuals, through random mutation, may have resistance. These survivors reproduce, and their offspring inherit resistance. After repeated applications, resistant individuals become common, and the pesticide becomes ineffective. The same process occurs in weeds exposed to herbicides. Farmers then must use higher doses or switch to different chemicals, which in turn selects for new resistances. This is an evolutionary arms race, and evolution always wins. Pests and weeds evolve much faster than new chemicals can be developed. Over 500 insect species and 250 weed species have evolved resistance to at least one pesticide or herbicide. This creates serious challenges for agriculture and requires new approaches, such as integrated pest management, which uses multiple strategies to reduce selection pressure. The evolution of resistance is a reminder that we cannot outpace evolution with brute force. We must work with it, not against it. Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands show rapid adaptation to environmental changes. The Galapagos finches, studied by Darwin and countless scientists since, are icons of evolution. These birds, descended from a common ancestor that arrived on the islands a few million years ago. Different islands offered different food sources, and finches evolved different beak shapes to exploit them. Finches on islands with large, hard seeds evolved thick, powerful beaks for cracking them. Finches on islands with insects evolved thin, pointed beaks for probing. This adaptive radiation, the diversification of a single lineage into many forms, is a classic example of natural selection. But the story doesn't end there. Scientists have been studying these finches for decades, and they've observed evolution happening in real time. During droughts, when small seeds are scarce and only large seeds remain, finches with larger beaks survive better and reproduce more. The average beak size in the population increases within a generation. When rains return and small seeds become abundant, the trend reverses. These rapid shifts show that evolution can respond quickly to environmental changes. The finches are still evolving, adapting continuously to their ever-changing world. Urban environments are driving rapid evolution in many species. Cities are not just human habitats. They are new ecosystems, and the species that live in them are evolving to cope with urban life. Studies have found that birds in cities sing at higher pitches to be heard over traffic noise. City-dwelling mice have evolved to prefer high-fat foods found in garbage. Urban lizards have evolved longer legs and stickier toe pads to climb smooth surfaces like walls and windows. Plants growing along roadsides, exposed to salt runoff, have evolved salt tolerance within decades. Insects in cities have evolved resistance to pesticides and can tolerate heat islands created by pavement and buildings. These changes are happening rapidly because cities create strong and consistent selection pressures. Urban evolution is a fascinating area of research, showing that evolution is not confined to remote wilderness. It is happening in our backyards, parks, and streets. The species that share our cities are adapting to us, and in doing so, they are evolving in real time. Climate change is driving shifts in the distribution and traits of many species. As global temperatures rise, species are responding in several ways. Many are shifting their geographic ranges, moving toward the poles or to higher elevations in search of cooler climates. Plants are blooming earlier in spring. Birds are migrating at different times. But beyond these behavioral and distributional changes, evolution is occurring. Some species are evolving smaller body sizes, which helps dissipate heat. Others are evolving changes in timing of reproduction to match shifts in food availability. Mosquitoes are expanding their ranges into previously cooler areas, and populations are evolving adaptations to new environments. Coral reefs, threatened by warming oceans, show some genetic diversity in heat tolerance, and natural selection may favor more heat-resistant individuals. However, evolution has limits. It requires genetic variation, and it takes time. Rapid climate change may outpace the ability of many species to adapt, leading to extinctions. Understanding how species evolve in response to climate change is crucial for predicting and managing future biodiversity. Domestication is human-directed evolution, creating new varieties in thousands of years. Humans have been shaping evolution for thousands of years through domestication. We have selectively bred plants and animals, choosing individuals with desirable traits and allowing them to reproduce. Over generations, this artificial selection has transformed wild species into the domesticated forms we depend on. Dogs descended from wolves, but selective breeding has created hundreds of breeds, from tiny chihuahuas to massive Great Danes. All are the same species, but human selection has exaggerated certain traits. Cows, pigs, chickens, sheep, and goats all descended from wild ancestors and have been shaped by human needs. Crops like wheat, corn, and rice are so different from their wild ancestors that they couldn't survive without human care. The cabbage family includes broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi, all bred from a single wild plant through selection for different traits. Domestication shows how powerful selection can be. In just a few thousand years, a blink of an eye in evolutionary time, we have created enormous diversity. It is evolution in fast forward, guided by human hands rather than natural environments. The story written in DNA. DNA is the molecule that stores genetic information in all living things. At the heart of evolution lies a molecule called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. It is the instruction manual for building and maintaining an organism. DNA is a long, twisted ladder, a double helix made of 4 chemical building blocks called nucleotides: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, abbreviated A, T, G, and C. The sequence of these letters encodes information, just as the letters of the alphabet encode words and sentences. A gene is a specific sequence of DNA that contains instructions for making a protein. Proteins do most of the work in cells. They build structures, speed up chemical reactions, fight infections, and carry signals. When a cell needs to make a protein, it reads the gene, transcribes it into RNA, and uses that RNA as a template to assemble amino acids into a protein chain. DNA is copied every time a cell divides, passing genetic information from parent to offspring. Mistakes in copying create mutations, the source of variation. DNA is universal. Every organism on Earth uses the same genetic code, the same 4 letters, the same method of storing and reading information. This universality is powerful evidence that all life shares a common ancestor. Comparing DNA sequences reveals evolutionary relationships between species. DNA provides the most direct evidence of evolutionary relationships. By comparing DNA sequences between species, scientists can determine how closely related they are. Species that share a recent common ancestor have very similar DNA. Species that diverged long ago have more differences. The pattern of similarities and differences allows scientists to reconstruct evolutionary trees, showing how species are related. For example, humans and chimpanzees share about 99% of their DNA, reflecting their recent common ancestor. Humans and mice share about 85%, and humans and fruit flies about 60%. Even baker's yeast shares about 30% of its genes with humans. These percentages reflect shared ancestry. The genes we have in common are ancient, inherited from ancestors that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. DNA comparisons have revolutionized our understanding of evolution. They allow scientists to study species that left no fossils, to date when lineages diverged, and to trace the spread of genes through populations. DNA is history written in molecules, a record more complete and detailed than any fossil. Humans share genes with every living organism, reflecting common ancestry. Some genes are so important that they have been conserved across billions of years of evolution. Humans share genes with bacteria, yeast, worms, flies, fish, and every other organism. For example, the genes that control how bodies develop, called Hox genes, are found in all animals, from flies to humans. They specify which end is the head and which is the tail, where limbs grow, where organs form. The version in a fly is so similar to the version in a mouse that you can swap them and they still work. This deep conservation shows that evolution is conservative, preserving what works. It also shows that all animals are related, using the same genetic toolkit to build bodies. Humans share many genes with plants too, especially those involved in basic cell functions. We even share genes with bacteria, particularly those involved in metabolism. These shared genes are our common heritage, inherited from ancestors that lived billions of years ago. Every time scientists sequence a new genome, they find more evidence of this shared history, written in the language of DNA. Genetic mutations are usually neutral or harmful, but occasionally beneficial. Mutations are random changes in DNA. They can be caused by errors during copying, by radiation, by chemicals, or by viruses inserting their DNA into the genome. Most mutations occur in non-coding regions and have no effect. Of those that affect genes, most are neutral, changing the DNA sequence but not the function of the protein. Some mutations are harmful, disrupting important functions and reducing survival or reproduction. These are quickly eliminated by natural selection, but a small fraction of mutations are beneficial, improving function or creating new abilities. These beneficial mutations are rare, but they are crucial. They provide the variation on which natural selection acts. Over millions of generations, beneficial mutations accumulate, leading to adaptation and the evolution of new traits. The ratio of harmful to beneficial mutations means evolution is usually a slow process, but it also means there is a constant supply of variation. Mutation is the ultimate source of evolutionary novelty, the engine of diversity. Horizontal gene transfer allows organisms to acquire genes from other species. We usually think of genes being passed vertically, from parent to offspring. But especially in bacteria, genes can be transferred horizontally, from one organism to another that is not its offspring. Bacteria can pick up DNA from their environment, absorb it, and incorporate it into their own genome. They can also transfer genes directly to each other through tiny bridges called pili. Viruses can carry genes from one organism to another. This horizontal gene transfer allows bacteria to acquire new abilities rapidly. Antibiotic resistance genes spread this way, moving from resistant bacteria to previously susceptible ones. Genes for digesting new food sources or surviving in extreme environments can spread through bacterial populations quickly. Horizontal gene transfer also occurs in more complex organisms, though less commonly. Many organisms, including humans, carry DNA from viruses that infected ancestors millions of years ago. Some of this viral DNA has been co-opted to serve useful functions. Horizontal gene transfer blurs the lines of the tree of life, creating a more web-like pattern at the base, and shows that evolution is more complex than a simple branching tree. Non-coding DNA makes up most of the human genome and plays important roles. Only about 2% of the human genome consists of genes that code for proteins. The remaining 98% was once called junk DNA, assumed to be useless evolutionary baggage. But research has shown that much of this non-coding DNA is not junk. It contains regulatory sequences that control when and where genes are turned on and off. These regulatory regions are crucial for development and function. Changes in regulatory DNA can have large effects on an organism. For example, differences in limb length between species often result from changes in regulatory regions rather than changes in the genes themselves. Non-coding DNA also includes sequences that help maintain chromosome structure, sites where proteins bind to package DNA, and RNA genes that don't code for proteins but have other functions. Some non-coding DNA is indeed junk, remnants of ancient viruses or duplicated genes that lost function, but much of it is functional and important. Understanding non-coding DNA is one of the frontiers of genetics, revealing the complexity of how genomes work and evolve. Epigenetics involves heritable changes that don't alter DNA sequence. For a long time, scientists thought evolution was entirely about changes in DNA sequence. But there is another layer of information, called epigenetics. Epigenetic changes are chemical modifications to DNA, or the proteins that package it, and these changes affect whether genes are turned on or off without altering the DNA sequence itself. These modifications can be inherited, passed from parent to offspring, and can persist for several generations. Epigenetic changes allow organisms to respond to environmental conditions. For example, if a pregnant mother experiences famine, epigenetic changes in her offspring may affect their metabolism, preparing them for a world of scarce food. These changes can be adaptive in the short term, but they can also have negative effects if the environment changes. Epigenetics adds complexity to evolution. It shows that inheritance is not just about DNA sequence, but also about how that DNA is packaged and regulated. Epigenetic variation can be a source of adaptation, especially in rapidly changing environments. It is a relatively new field, and scientists are still discovering how important epigenetics is for evolution. The evidence for evolution. The fossil record documents the history of life over billions of years. Fossils are the preserved remains, or traces of ancient organisms, and they provide direct evidence of evolution. The fossil record is not complete. Preservation is rare and requires specific conditions, but it is extensive enough to reveal broad patterns. Fossils show that life has changed dramatically over time. The oldest fossils, 3.5 billion years old, are of simple bacteria. For billions of years, only single-celled organisms existed. Then, about 600 million years ago, multicellular animals appeared. The Cambrian explosion is documented in fossils from around the world. Later, rocks contain fossils of fish, then amphibians, then reptiles, then mammals and birds. The sequence is consistent across the globe. Simple organisms in old rocks, more complex ones in younger rocks. Fossils also document transitions between major groups. There are fossils of fish with limb-like fins, of reptiles with mammalian features, of dinosaurs with feathers. These transitional fossils show that evolution is gradual, that major changes occur through accumulation of small steps. The fossil record is like a vast library of ancient life, and each fossil is a page in the story of evolution. Transitional fossils show intermediate forms between major groups. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence for evolution is the existence of transitional fossils, organisms that have characteristics of two different groups. Tiktaalik, for example, lived about 375 million years ago. It had the gills and scales of a fish, but also had a flat head, a neck, and robust fins with wrist bones that could support weight. It is a transition between fish and tetrapods, showing how vertebrates moved from water to land. Archaeopteryx is a transition between dinosaurs and birds. It had feathers and wings like a bird, but also teeth, a long bony tail, and claws on its wings like a reptile. It is one of many feathered dinosaurs now known. Ambulocetus is a transition in whale evolution, a creature that could walk on land like a mammal but had adaptations for swimming. Its name means walking whale. These fossils are exactly what evolutionary theory predicts, organisms that are neither one thing nor another, but something in between. They are snapshots of evolution in progress, capturing moments in the transformation from one form to another. Comparative anatomy reveals similar structures modified for different functions. When you compare the skeletons of different vertebrates, you see remarkable similarities. The arm of a human, the wing of a bat, the flipper of a whale, and the leg of a cat all have the same basic bone structure: one upper bone, two lower bones, a cluster of wrist bones, and 5 digits. These are called homologous structures, features that are similar because they were inherited from a common ancestor. Over millions of years, natural selection has modified these structures for different functions, but the underlying plan remains the same. This pattern makes sense only in light of evolution. If each species were designed independently, there would be no reason for a whale's flipper to contain the same bones as a human arm. But if species share a common ancestor, they inherit the same body plan and modify it. Homologous structures are powerful evidence of common descent, showing that species are related and that evolution works by modifying existing structures rather than creating new ones from scratch. Vestigial organs are remnants of structures that served functions in ancestors. Evolution is not perfect. It leaves behind evidence of its history in the form of vestigial structures, body parts that have lost most or all of their original function. Humans have several. The appendix is a small pouch that probably helped digest plant material in herbivorous ancestors. The muscles that make your hair stand on end, causing goosebumps, once helped furry ancestors puff up for warmth or intimidation. The coccyx, or tailbone, is the remnant of a tail. Human embryos even have a temporary tail that is usually reabsorbed before birth. Whales and some snakes have tiny useless hip bones buried inside their bodies, remnants of when their ancestors had legs. Cave-dwelling animals often have non-functional eyes, vestiges from sighted ancestors. These structures make no sense as designs. Why would a creator give a whale hip bones? But they make perfect sense as evolutionary history, leftovers from ancestors that used these structures. Vestigial organs are not perfectly removed because evolution cannot plan ahead. It can only work with what exists, and if a structure is not actively harmful, it may persist even after losing its function. Biogeography shows patterns of species distribution explained by evolution. The geographic distribution of species provides compelling evidence for evolution. Species are not randomly distributed across the globe. Instead, they show patterns that reflect evolutionary history and continental drift. Islands have unique species found nowhere else, descended from colonizers that arrived long ago and evolved in isolation. The Galapagos finches, the lemurs of Madagascar, the marsupials of Australia, all are examples. Australia has been isolated for millions of years, and its mammals evolved independently from those on other continents, resulting in a fauna dominated by marsupials. Placental mammals dominate everywhere else. South America was also isolated and developed its own unique fauna, including sloths, armadillos, and capybaras. When continents connect, species spread and mix, creating new patterns. Biogeography makes sense in light of evolution and continental drift. Species evolve in one place and spread outward, or they become isolated and evolve independently. If species were created in their current forms and placed where we find them, the patterns would be inexplicable. But evolution, combined with the movement of continents and the formation of barriers, explains biogeography perfectly. Embryonic development in different species shows shared ancestry. The development of embryos provides powerful evidence of evolution. Early in development, the embryos of very different vertebrates look strikingly similar. They all have a notochord, a flexible rod that supports the body. They all have pharyngeal arches, which in fish become gills, but in mammals become parts of the jaw, ears, and throat. They all have a postanal tail. As development proceeds, species-specific features appear, and the embryos diverge. But the similarities early on reflect shared ancestry. All vertebrates inherited the same developmental program from a common ancestor, and evolution has modified it in different ways. This is why human embryos briefly have structures resembling gill slits and a tail, even though adults do not. They are relics of our evolutionary past, revealed during development. Evolutionary biologists sometimes say that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, meaning development replays evolutionary history. This is an oversimplification, but there is truth in it. Development provides a window into the past, showing the evolutionary relationships between species. The complexity of evolution. Evolution can produce seemingly designed complexity through gradual steps. One common objection to evolution is that complex structures like the eye seem too intricate to have evolved gradually. How could something as complex as an eye, with its lens, retina, and optic nerve, arise step by step? The answer is that each intermediate step provided an advantage. The simplest light-sensitive cells, just patches of pigment that can distinguish light from dark, are better than no light detection at all. A cup-shaped depression focuses light better than a flat patch. A small opening in the cup, like a pinhole camera, produces a sharper image. A transparent covering protects the opening. A lens focuses light even better. Each of these steps is an improvement over the previous one, and each is found in living animals today. Some flatworms have simple eye spots, Nautiluses have pinhole camera eyes. Vertebrates have lens eyes. Evolution does not need to build an eye all at once. It builds it gradually, step by step, with each step providing a survival advantage. What seems impossibly complex becomes understandable when broken down into small, incremental changes. Irreducible complexity is a flawed argument against evolution. Some argue that certain biological systems are irreducibly complex, meaning they require all their parts to function, and therefore could not have evolved gradually. The bacterial flagellum, a whip-like structure used for swimming, is often cited. It has dozens of protein parts, and if you remove any one, it doesn't work. How could it evolve step by step? The answer is that the parts did not all evolve together for the current function. Many of the proteins in the flagellum are similar to proteins used in other systems, like the type 3 secretion system that bacteria use to inject toxins into cells. Evolution co-opts existing parts for new functions. A structure that originally served one purpose can be modified to serve another. Intermediate stages may not resemble the final product, and some parts may change function over time. Irreducible complexity assumes that evolution must follow a straight path to the current function. But evolution is opportunistic. It tinkers with what is available, creating new structures from old parts. The bacterial flagellum and other supposedly irreducibly complex systems are well explained by evolution. Exaptation occurs when a trait evolved for one purpose is co-opted for another. Evolution is a tinkerer, not an engineer. It does not design structures from scratch, but modifies existing ones. Sometimes a trait that evolved for one function is later used for another, a process called exaptation. Feathers are a classic example. They likely evolved first for insulation, keeping small dinosaurs warm. Later, they were co-opted for display, used to attract mates or intimidate rivals. Eventually, in one lineage, feathers became large and stiff enough to support flight. Flight was not the original function of feathers, but feathers made flight possible. Another example is the bones of the inner ear. In early vertebrates, these bones were part of the jaw. Over millions of years, they became smaller, moved inward, and were co-opted for hearing, where they amplify sound. Exaptation shows that evolution is flexible and creative. Structures evolve for one reason and end up being useful for something else entirely. This opportunism is one reason evolution can produce such diverse and complex forms. Evolutionary constraints limit the possible directions of evolution. Evolution is powerful, but it is not unlimited. There are constraints, limitations on what evolution can produce. One constraint is historical. Evolution can only modify what already exists. It cannot go back to the drawing board and start over. This is why all vertebrates have 4 limbs or fewer. The ancestor of tetrapods had 4 limbs, and evolution has worked with that blueprint ever since. Whales don't have 6 flippers. They have 2 front flippers and a tail made from modified hind limbs. Another constraint is developmental. Changing early developmental processes can have catastrophic effects, so there are limits on how much early development can evolve. Physical laws also constrain evolution. There are limits to how large land animals can be before their bones cannot support their weight. Insects cannot grow very large because their respiratory system, which relies on diffusion, would not provide enough oxygen. Evolutionary constraints explain why some forms never evolve. There are no flying elephants, no photosynthetic mammals, no wheels in biological systems. Evolution is creative, but it works within limits. Evolution has no goal or direction, only adaptation to current conditions. A common misconception is that evolution is progressive, moving toward some goal or endpoint. But evolution has no direction. It does not aim for complexity, intelligence, or perfection. It is not a ladder leading upward, but a branching tree spreading outward. Natural selection favors traits that improve survival and reproduction in the current environment, not traits that might be useful in the future. Evolution cannot plan ahead. If the environment changes, what was once advantageous may become harmful, and vice versa. This is why evolution can produce structures that seem poorly designed. The human eye, for example, has its nerves and blood vessels in front of the retina, creating a blind spot. A better design would have them behind, as in octopus eyes. But evolution worked with the structure it had, and the result is imperfect. Evolution is a process without intention, driven by the immediate pressures of survival and reproduction. It produces beautiful, complex, and diverse life, not because it aims to, but because those are the results of countless generations of adaptation. Mass extinctions have redirected the path of evolution multiple times. If you could rewind the history of life and play it again, would the same species evolve? Probably not. Evolution is contingent, dependent on unpredictable events. Mass extinctions are the clearest examples. When 90% of species disappear, as in the Permian extinction, the survivors determine what comes next. If different species had survived, the subsequent evolution would have been entirely different. Imagine if dinosaurs had not gone extinct. Mammals might have remained small and nocturnal, and humans might never have evolved. Or imagine if a different group of fish had colonized land. Tetrapods might have 6 limbs instead of 4, and every land vertebrate today would be built on that plan. Mass extinctions are unpredictable. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs was a chance event, and they reshape the tree of life. Evolution is not deterministic. History matters. The species alive today are the result of a particular path through billions of years, shaped by countless contingencies. If we could replay the tape of life, the outcome would almost certainly be different. Evolution and humanity. Humans are still evolving, shaped by modern environments. Evolution did not stop when humans appeared. We are still evolving, and will continue to as long as there is genetic variation and differential reproduction. Some traits are evolving in human populations today. For example, lactose tolerance, the ability to digest milk into adulthood, evolved in populations that domesticated cattle and relied on dairy products. In these populations, natural selection favored individuals who could digest lactose, and the trait became common. In populations without a history of dairy farming, most adults are lactose intolerant. Similarly, populations living at high altitudes, like Tibetans and Andeans, have evolved genetic adaptations that help them cope with low oxygen levels. Sickle cell trait, which provides some protection against malaria, is common in regions where malaria is endemic. Modern medicine and technology have changed the environment, but they have not stopped evolution. They have only changed the selection pressures. Humans continue to adapt, and our evolution is ongoing. Cultural evolution operates alongside biological evolution in humans. Humans are unique in the extent to which culture shapes our lives. Culture, learned behaviors, and knowledge passed from generation to generation through teaching and imitation evolves much faster than biology. New technologies, languages, customs, and ideas can spread through populations in years or decades, not millennia. Cultural evolution has allowed humans to adapt to new environments without waiting for genetic changes. We can survive in the Arctic by making warm clothing and shelters, not by evolving thick fur. We can digest a wide variety of foods by cooking and processing them, not by evolving new digestive enzymes. Cultural evolution has become the dominant force shaping human life. but it is not separate from biological evolution. The two interact. The invention of dairy farming created selection pressure for lactose tolerance. The use of fire and cooking may have favored smaller teeth and jaws. Culture and biology co-evolve, each shaping the other. Understanding this interaction is essential to understanding what it means to be human. The future evolution of humans is uncertain, but ongoing. What does the future hold for human evolution? It is impossible to predict with certainty, but we can make some observations. Natural selection still operates, but modern medicine and technology have reduced some traditional selection pressures. Diseases that once killed many people are now treatable, reducing selection for disease resistance. However, new selection pressures have emerged. As humans spread into new environments, from cities to space, we may adapt to those conditions. Gene flow is now global, as people migrate and intermarry, which tends to homogenize populations and reduce genetic differences. But genetic drift can still operate in small, isolated populations. In the distant future, if humans colonize other planets, populations may diverge and potentially speciate, becoming distinct species adapted to different worlds. Technology may also play a role. If genetic engineering becomes widespread, humans may direct their own evolution. The future of human evolution is uncertain. But one thing is clear: it will continue. We are not the end point of evolution, but part of an ongoing process. Understanding evolution informs medicine, agriculture, and conservation. Evolution is not just an abstract scientific theory. It has practical applications that affect daily life. In medicine, understanding evolution is crucial for combating infectious diseases. Viruses and bacteria evolve rapidly, and treatments must account for this. Vaccine development, antibiotic stewardship, and predicting disease outbreaks all rely on evolutionary principles. In agriculture, evolution guides crop and livestock breeding. Understanding how traits are inherited and how selection works allows farmers to develop varieties with higher yields, better nutrition, and disease resistance. Conservation biology relies heavily on evolution. Protecting endangered species requires understanding their genetic diversity, how small populations evolve, and how to maintain viable populations. Evolution also informs our understanding of ecosystem function, as species interactions are products of co-evolution. From medicine to agriculture to environmental protection, evolution provides the framework for understanding and managing the living world. All humans belong to one species with recent African origins. Despite differences in appearance, all humans are one species, Homo sapiens. We can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, the definition of a biological species. Genetic studies show that humans are remarkably similar compared to other species. There is more genetic diversity within a single population of chimpanzees than among all humans worldwide. This is because humans are a young species, only about 300,000 years old, and we passed through a population bottleneck when our numbers were very small. The genetic evidence is clear. All modern humans share a recent common ancestry in Africa. The idea of distinct human races has no biological foundation. The variation we see in skin color, hair texture, and facial features represents minor adaptations to local environments, all occurring within the past 100,000 years. These superficial differences obscure the profound genetic unity of humanity. We are one family, closely related, sharing a common history written in our DNA. Evolution explains our human nature, but does not determine our choices. Understanding evolution can help us understand aspects of human behavior and psychology. Our emotions, social instincts, and even some cognitive biases are products of evolution. shaped by natural selection in our ancestors' environments. For example, our preference for sweet and fatty foods made sense when calories were scarce, though it can be problematic in a world of abundance. Our tendency to fear snakes and spiders more than cars, even though cars are far more dangerous, reflects ancestral dangers. But while evolution explains these tendencies, it does not determine our behavior. Humans have culture, reason, and free will. We can recognize our evolved instincts and choose to override them. We can change our diets, confront our fears, and cooperate on scales far beyond what our ancestors experienced. Evolution gives us a nature, but it does not give us a destiny. Understanding our evolutionary origins helps us understand ourselves, but it does not limit our potential. The wonder of evolution. Evolution connects all living things in one great tree of life. There is something deeply beautiful about the evolutionary story. Every organism on Earth, from the smallest bacterium to the largest whale, is related. We all share common ancestors. If you could trace your family tree back far enough, you would find connections to every other human. Go back further, and you share ancestors with chimpanzees. Further still, with all mammals, then all vertebrates, then all animals, then all multicellular life, and finally, billions of years ago, with every living thing. We are all branches on one immense tree of life, rooted in the distant past. This connection is not metaphorical. It is real, written in our DNA, visible in our anatomy, documented in fossils. The unity of life is one of the most profound discoveries in science, and it inspires a sense of kinship with the natural world. We are not separate from nature. We are part of it, one species among millions, all related, all products of the same ancient process. Evolution reveals the deep history of life on Earth. The story of evolution is the grandest story ever told. It spans billions of years, countless species, and every corner of the planet. It is a story of survival and extinction, of innovation and adaptation, of catastrophe and recovery. It is the story of how simple molecules became cells, how cells became complex, how life moved from sea to land, how creatures learned to fly, how intelligence emerged. It is the story of trilobites and dinosaurs, of forests and deserts, of ice ages and warm periods. It is the story of how a small, tree-dwelling primate evolved into a species capable of understanding its own origins. This story is still being written. Scientists discover new fossils, sequence new genomes, and observe evolution in action. Each discovery adds detail, refines understanding, and deepens appreciation. The story of evolution is the history of life, and it is still unfolding. Small changes over deep time create astonishing diversity. One of evolution's most remarkable features is its ability to produce vast diversity from simple beginnings. The process is slow, but time is abundant. Small changes, tiny mutations, minor advantages accumulate over generations. After thousands of generations, a population is noticeably different. After millions of generations, it is a new species. After hundreds of millions of years, a single ancestral fish has given rise to all tetrapods, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, including humans. The same process that produces a new variety of flower can, given enough time, produce an entirely new kingdom of life. Evolution is not a special force or mysterious power. It is simply the inevitable result of variation, inheritance, and selection operating over deep time. But the results are extraordinary. The diversity of life on Earth, millions of species in countless forms, all arose from common ancestors through this simple yet powerful process. Evolution is one of the most well-supported theories in science. Some people question evolution, but among scientists, there is no controversy. Evolution is one of the most thoroughly documented and best supported theories in all of science, on par with gravity and germ theory. The evidence comes from multiple independent fields: paleontology, anatomy, embryology, molecular biology, genetics, and biogeography. All of these fields converge on the same conclusion: life has evolved over billions of years from common ancestors. Thousands of scientists in hundreds of countries have studied evolution for over 150 years, and the evidence has only grown stronger. New technologies like DNA sequencing have provided overwhelming confirmation. Evolution is not a guess or a hunch. It is a robust scientific theory, meaning a well-substantiated explanation supported by vast amounts of evidence. It has been tested countless times and has never been refuted. Understanding evolution is essential to understanding biology. Famous geneticist Theodosius Dobzhansky wrote, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." Understanding evolution deepens appreciation for the living world. Learning about evolution changes how you see the world. A bird is not just a bird, but a living dinosaur, a descendant of creatures that walked alongside Tyrannosaurus rex. A tree is not just a tree, but the product of 500 million years of adaptation, refined by countless generations to capture sunlight and withstand storms. Your own hand, with its 5 fingers, is built on the same pattern as a bat's wing and a whale's flipper, a design inherited from a fish that crawled onto land 375 million years ago. Evolution reveals the hidden connections, the deep history, the shared ancestry behind every living thing. It shows that life is not static, but dynamic, constantly changing, adapting, and diversifying. It reveals a world far more intricate, ancient, and wondrous than it first appears. Understanding evolution is not about memorizing facts. It is about seeing the world through new eyes, recognizing the epic story written in every creature, and appreciating the remarkable journey that has led to the rich tapestry of life we see today. And so, dear listener, our journey through the story of evolution comes to a close. From the first spark of life in ancient oceans to the emergence of humanity, we have traced a path spanning billions of years. We have seen how tiny changes accumulate into vast transformations, how species adapt and diversify, how extinction and survival shape the tree of life. We have explored the mechanisms that drive evolution, the evidence that supports it, and the wonder it inspires. The story of evolution is not separate from our own story. It is our story, the history of where we came from and how we came to be. Every cell in your body, every breath you take, every thought you think is part of this ancient legacy. You are a living link in a chain stretching back through time, connected to every organism that has ever lived. As you rest here, letting your breathing slow and deepen, imagine yourself part of this great continuity. Picture the first cells drifting in primordial seas, the first creatures crawling onto land, the first flowers blooming, the first birds taking flight. See your ancestors, distant and barely human, standing beneath the same stars, all of it flowing forward, generation after generation, leading to this moment, to you, here, now. The story is not finished. Evolution continues, in bacteria adapting to antibiotics, in finches changing their beaks, in humans spreading across the world and beyond. You are part of an ongoing process, a story still being written. Rest in that knowledge, in the deep time that came before, and the vast future that stretches ahead. Let the rhythm of evolution, slow and steady, carry you into stillness, into peace, into sleep. If you are still awake, you may drift on to the next video when you are ready. But if your eyes are growing heavy, let the long journey of life on Earth hold you gently and carry you softly into rest. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and drift into sleep, into stillness, into the vast and timeless flow where all life connects. Good night.